continue to perform well under the tough economic environment. That's according to the EY's report on the health of the commercial banking industry. It's reported profits at 75 billion rand in 2015. Headline earnings growth accelerated from 2014 levels despite weaker GDP growth. So I spoke to Andy Bates, financial services expert at EY, and he gave us his overall views about the report.
When we did our most recent banking confidence index, which looked at confidence levels in December, I think there were probably quite a good few reasons around for the banks to be a little more pessimistic than they had been in Q3 of 2015. So when we released those results in January, it seemed that the banking confidence had declined somewhat. So we were expecting that maybe to show up in the year-end numbers. But the thing that's very interesting about the year-end numbers that the banks have shown, with really decent increase in earnings, about 15-16%, a decent increase in advances, in overall assets, cost-income ratios quite steady, and impairments quite steady as well. We think that the South African banks as a whole have produced a very good set of numbers for 2015, which if you listen to some of the mood music around financial services, around the macroeconomic environment in South Africa, could surprise some people.
Then the good question is, how long can South African banks continue to endure this weak economic atmosphere?
That's the big question we think for this year, because in many respects, it looks like the banks have managed to buck the trend in terms of growing strongly in a low overall growth environment. So whether they can do that this year, again, when we expect to be in a low growth environment, remains to be seen. But we do think that the opportunities for the banks are great. If you look at the size of the potential market, not just in South Africa, but outside of Africa, where many of them have said they want to grow the business and become more reliant on revenues from outside of South Africa. On a continent where the average age is 19, in South Africa that's 24, there's a very large proportion of people who are unbanked or underbanked. So there's still great opportunities out there for the banks to grow, and we think they're in quite good health as we move into 2016. It's obviously a big concern for the banks because it affects them in a couple of different ways. Obviously one is the overall mood music around the country and people's willingness to invest in South Africa, and obviously it affects them in terms of the ability of financial institutions to invest in South Africa if the debt is not an investment grade. So it's a big concern, and I think the banks are doing what they can to stave that off. Working with government and trying to make sure that everyone's doing the right things. And I think that the Minister of Finance has made very encouraging noises about wanting to really avoid that as far as possible. So I think it's something that the banks are concerned about, but not necessarily something which is within their control. So I think most of them are focused very much on developing the core business, growing their own franchises, and really educating the rating agencies around their own banks and ensuring that analysts are aware of what's really going on in their core franchises and just how strong they are.
Looking at risk management on the downside, the cyber attacks and internet fraud.
Yeah, it's a massive concern, and I think IT and the risk of IT has become far more prominent over the last couple of years with the banks than perhaps it had been previously. If you look at the rise now of digital banking, all the disruption that's going on with fintechs and other entrants into the market, then the front end of banking has become a lot more IT dependent than it was a few years ago. I think cybersecurity remains one of the risks which is near the top of the house for most banks, because in the end it's a reputational risk. It's not just about IT, it's actually about the integrity of your offerings and your ability to have customers who trust you, because in the end that's what banking comes down to. It's can your customers trust you to look after their affairs? I think as users of banking we should be excited, because what it's really unleashed is a wave of innovation, because that's what competition brings, and we're seeing the competition is coming from traditional players in financial services, but also many non-traditional players, like for example telecoms companies. I was in Kenya a week or two ago and we spent some time with clients, with a regulator as well as end users, talking about the mobile money revolution that's going on there, and that's been fascinating to see. So I think for customers it's a great position to be in. There's a lot of innovation that's been unleashed by the competition, and a lot of the competition now to the traditional banks is coming from some unlikely sources, whether that's retail, whether that's telecoms, and we're seeing a lot of collaboration across industry groups to disrupt financial services. So that can only be good news for the consumer. For the traditional banks, that means that they have to ensure that their own digital offerings are keeping pace or ahead of the new entrants. And in some cases we're seeing them innovate themselves. In other cases we're seeing them partner with some of the disruptors to effectively use the if you like, the entrepreneurial spirit of the disruptors, along with the more traditional strengths of the banks, the size of the balance sheet, etc., the customer bases that they have, to really partner together. So it'll be very interesting to see over the next 5 to 10 years, if you look at the banking landscape, it could be quite different to how it looks today.